Have you ever wanted something so much that you let other people take big risks, again and again, just so you could have it? Picture a dusty road outside a small Italian town in 1908. A boy stands at the side of it. He holds his father's hand. He is 10 years old. Far away, a sound grows louder. It is a low, angry sound. It feels like the ground is shaking. Then a car appears. It is deep red. It flies past in a second, and dust hits the boy's face. He does not move back. He does not blink. Something wakes up inside him in that moment. It never goes back to sleep. He will spend his whole life chasing that same red shape on roads just like this one. He will build cars faster than almost anyone else in the world. He will stand at more finish lines than most men in history. But there is one thing he will never do, not one time, in almost 70 years of racing. He will never cross that finish line first, with his own hands on the wheel. Tonight, we are not telling the story of a car. We are telling the story of the man who built one of the most famous names in racing, a man whose company is now worth many billions of dollars. But this story does not start with money, and it does not start with a win. It starts with a boy who fell in love with something he could never fully have for himself. This is Enzo Ferrari. He was born on February 18, 1898, in the small city of Modena, in the north of Italy. This is the story of a man who spent his whole life paying a price for speed, a price that never felt fully paid. Enzo's father, Alfredo, ran a small metal shop. It made parts for trains. The shop was loud, full of banging metal and hot steam. It smelled of oil and smoke. Young Enzo loved it there. His father had one strange little habit. Before Enzo walked into the shop, his father would stop him at the door. He would ask Enzo to close his eyes. Then he would ask one simple question. "Can you tell me which machine is running, just from the sound?" At first, Enzo always got it wrong. Slowly, month by month, he learned to hear the small differences between one engine and another. It was like learning to tell one bird's song from another. "Listen first," his father always said. "Then look." It was a small game between them. They played it so many times, it stopped feeling like a lesson. It started to feel like love. Enzo had an older brother too. His name was also Alfredo. The two boys grew up close. They often stood together at the edge of that same dusty road, watching the race cars go by, arguing happily about which car had the best engine. Then, in 1916, war took almost everything from him at once. World War I was tearing through Europe, and Italy was deep inside it. Enzo's father died that year. He grew weak during the hardest months of the war. Only weeks later, his brother Alfredo died too. His body had already grown weak from the war around him. Enzo himself was sent into the army soon after. He fell badly ill during his time there and spent long weeks in a hospital bed before he could finally go home. He was only 18 years old. The shop that once rang with hammers and laughter went quiet. He needed a new path in life, and somewhere inside him, that dusty road from 1908 was still calling him back. In 1919, at 21, Enzo finally got his chance. A small car company called CMN hired him. First he tested cars, then he raced them. His very first race was a hard climb up a mountain, from the city of Parma to a small town called Poggio di Berceto. His car broke down twice on the way. He fixed it himself, with his own hands, right there on the road, and finished the race anyway. He was far from first place, but he finished. That same year, he entered an even harder race, the Targa Florio, on the mountain roads of Sicily. People say wild wolves even crossed the road in front of him during the night. His car arrived hours late. The workers at the finish line had already begun packing up. Still, he made sure to finish every single mile of the course. It was not a shiny, perfect start to a career. But it was, in its own stubborn way, exactly the kind of start that matched who he was. In 1920, Enzo joined a much bigger company, Alfa Romeo, first as a driver, and later as much more than that. Over the next few years, he raced across Italy. He learned the whole sport from the inside. He studied every single part of every engine he touched, until he understood these machines almost as well as the men who built them. Here is a part of this story that speed never lets anyone forget. Speed always asks for something back. It does not care how much a person loves it. Over the years that followed, many drivers who raced for teams close to Enzo Ferrari never came home from a race weekend. By the late 1950s, some Italian newspapers had given him a bitter nickname. They called him Saturn, an old god who ate his own children. It was a cruel thing to say, but in its own dark way, it was hard to fully deny too. This was the shadow that Enzo Ferrari lived under for almost his whole adult life. It was a quiet, constant math between glory and loss. The two sides never fully balanced in either direction. Here is one more small detail worth holding on to from these early years. That first race Enzo watched, back in 1908, was part of a kind of racing he would love for the rest of his life. But he would never win it himself, as a driver, not once, no matter how close he came. Remember that dusty road. We will come back to it before this story ends. In 1923, racing for Alfa Romeo, Enzo won an important race called the Circuito del Savio. That day, he met a woman named Countess Paolina Baracca. Her son had been a fighter pilot named Francesco Baracca. He had died flying for Italy during the war. On his plane, the young pilot had painted a small black horse, standing tall on its back legs. The Countess gave that same picture to Enzo. She hoped it would bring him the kind of luck her own son never had. Enzo added a bright yellow background, the color of his home city, and he kept that little horse close for the rest of his life. The next year, in 1924, everything almost ended. During a race in Germany, Enzo crashed badly. His body came out mostly whole, but something inside him had broken. Doctors at the time called it a nervous breakdown. His wife, Laura, pushed him hard to stop racing. He listened to her. At only 26 years old, Enzo Ferrari drove his very last race as a driver. From that day on, he would spend his life sending other men onto the road instead of going himself. By 1929, Enzo had built his own small racing group called Scuderia Ferrari. It managed cars and drivers for other teams. By 1933, Alfa Romeo gave him full control of their whole official racing team. For years, his drivers carried that small yellow and black horse to win after win across Italy and beyond. One driver in this group was a fearless man named Tazio Nuvolari. Under Enzo's care, Nuvolari became almost a legend, winning a big race in Germany in 1935 in a car that was, on paper, simply not as fast as the others. Enzo would later say that watching Nuvolari drive was the closest he ever came to understanding why people risked their lives for this sport at all. Then, in 1938, Alfa Romeo took that power back for itself. A year later, the two sides fully parted ways. As part of that split, Enzo agreed not to race again under his own name for 4 full years. In 1940, he built a car anyway, under a different company name, quietly waiting for the years to pass. By 1943, the war had already forced his small workshop to move from Modena to a nearby town called Maranello. That same small town would soon become forever linked to his name. By 1947, the wait was finally over. The first true car with the Ferrari name, a small machine called the 125S, went out onto the track. It did not win its first race. It won its second, in the streets of Rome. close enough for Enzo to watch the car cross the line himself, for the first time since his own racing days had ended, years before. The company grew slowly at first. Fewer than 50 people worked in the small Maranello factory in those early years, building the cars almost entirely by hand. Enzo sold a small number of beautiful road cars to rich buyers each year. He used nearly all of that money for one single purpose: to pay for the race team. He often told visitors, half joking, half serious, that he did not build cars to drive to dinner. He built them to race, and the road cars simply paid for that. By 1949, a Ferrari had already won the famous Le Mans race in France. By the early 1950s, Ferrari cars were winning in the brand new Formula One World Championship too, against much bigger companies than his own. Building all of this came with a price that few outsiders ever fully saw. Enzo did not just love winning. He needed it, the way some people need air. Inside his own factory, he pushed his drivers harder than most team owners would ever dare to do. He wanted the fastest cars in the world, and he wanted them now, not next season. Some of his own engineers, quietly, in private, called him a hard man to work for, even cruel at times. He rarely said they were wrong. To Enzo, winning was never only about the machine. It was about proving, again and again, that the boy who never crossed that finish line himself could still build something that always would. In later years, he almost never traveled to watch his own cars race, not even the biggest events. Some people thought this simply meant he was cold. Those closer to him thought something harder to explain. Standing at a finish line he could never cross himself had grown, over so many years, more painful than staying home and waiting for the phone to ring. In June 1956, that same price for speed came right to his own family. His son, named Alfredo but called Dino by everyone, had been sick for years with a serious illness in his muscles. As a boy, Dino had sat beside his father in that same workshop. In his own quiet way, he learned to listen for the sound of a healthy engine, just as Enzo once had with his own father. Dino had even started helping to design a new engine before he grew too sick to continue. His father would later finish that engine and give it his son's name. That June, in the middle of one of Ferrari's biggest racing seasons, Dino died. He was only 24 years old. Enzo said almost nothing about it in public. He did not close the factory. He did not slow the racing plans down, not even for a week. People who worked closely with him later said that after Dino's death, Enzo seemed to sink a little deeper into his work each year, as if the sound of an engine was now the only voice that still made sense to him. Years later, he gave that engine his son had helped build its own name. He put it on a whole line of smaller Ferrari cars, simply called Dino, and quietly kept his own family name off of them completely. The loss did not stop there. Over the next years, the price of speed kept coming back to Ferrari's door. In 1955, the reigning world champion, Alberto Ascari, died while testing a different sports car, only days after he had walked away from a crash into the sea at Monaco. Strangely, he had been wearing another driver's helmet that day, having left his own at home. In 1957, during the hard Mille Miglia road race, a Ferrari, driven by the Marquis Alfonso de Portago, had a tire burst at very high speed. The car flew into the crowd. De Portago died right away, along with the man riding with him and 9 people watching, including several children. The public anger that followed helped bring the Mille Miglia to a full end, a race that had run for almost 30 years. Then, in one terrible season in 1958, Ferrari lost 2 more of its own drivers, Luigi Musso and Peter Collins, only weeks apart from each other. Each time, Enzo gave a short public message, went to what services he could, and went back to the workshop almost right away. Each time, the factory in Maranello opened again the next morning, right on time, the way it always did. To many people in Italy, his silence looked cold. To those closest to him, it looked more like a man who had simply run out of any other way to survive the weight of it all. And still, through all of this loss, the wins kept coming. In 1961, Ferrari won its first Formula One Constructors' Championship, a title given to the very best team, not just the best driver, in the whole sport. An American driver named Phil Hill became the very first man from the United States to win the top driver's title in that very same car. It should have felt like the top of everything Enzo had built, a moment worth every sleepless night, every hard word with his engineers, every gray hair the sport had given him. It did not feel that way, not fully. Every title now came with the names of men who were no longer alive to see it. Enzo had spent years chasing the exact kind of glory that boy on the dusty road once dreamed of. Now that the glory had truly arrived, it tasted, in his own quiet words to close friends, more like grief than joy, a strange, heavy feeling he was never fully able to put into words for anyone outside his closest circle. There is one more part of this story that almost nobody in Italy knew for more than 30 years. In the 1940s, Enzo began a quiet relationship with a woman named Lina Lardi. In 1945, she gave birth to his son, Piero. Enzo never fully hid Piero away. He visited him often and helped him closely through his childhood. He even quietly brought him into the factory as a young man to learn the business firsthand. But Enzo never once said his son's name in public, and Piero never carried the Ferrari name out in the open. Workers at the factory likely knew exactly who the quiet young man walking through the shop really was. Almost none of them ever said so out loud, not to him, not to anyone else. For over 30 years, while the whole world watched the famous Enzo Ferrari chase trophies and headlines, a second, quieter part of his life went on in careful, protected silence, counted by no scoreboard, printed in no newspaper. Now we go back to the ocean, and to Ford. By 1963, Ford, one of the biggest car companies on Earth, wanted to own Ferrari completely. The American company had grown tired of watching this tiny Italian factory, with only a few hundred workers, beat them again and again at almost every big race that mattered. Lawyers on both sides spent weeks going through every detail, flying back and forth between Detroit and Maranello, writing and rewriting page after page of the agreement. For a while, it looked like the deal would really happen. Then, as almost everyone who later told the story remembers it, Enzo reached one part of the paper that gave Ford full control over Ferrari's racing money, the very heart of everything he had built. People remember him standing up and saying, in short, that he would not build cars for a company that would not let him race on his own terms. Then he walked out, leaving Ford's lawyers still sitting at the table. Ford's leaders were furious. They decided that if they could not buy Ferrari, they would beat Ferrari at the one race that mattered most to both companies, Le Mans in France. Ford spent huge amounts of money on a new car built for one single job, spending far more than Ferrari's whole company was worth, just to build a machine that could win that one race. In June 1966, that plan worked. Ford's cars finished first, second, and third, ending years of Ferrari's wins at that race in one single, painful afternoon. Some newspapers called it the end of an age. In Maranello, Enzo said almost nothing in public, though people close to him later said that loss stayed with him longer than almost any race loss before it. The failed Ford deal still left Ferrari in a hard spot. Building both road cars and race cars on a small company's money grew harder every year against much bigger rivals. In 1969, Enzo finally agreed to sell half of his company to the Italian car maker Fiat. But he put one condition into that new deal too, just as firmly as he had once said no to Ford. Fiat's money could pay for the road cars. The race team, win or lose, would stay completely his own to run until the very end of his life. But Le Mans was not finished with Enzo Ferrari yet. 17 years before, in 1949, a small Ferrari, driven by Luigi Chinetti, had crossed that very same finish line first, the company's very first win at that race. Chinetti had driven almost the whole 24 hours alone, barely resting, hardly ever handing the wheel to his partner. Enzo was not there to see it in person. He was back home in Modena, sitting near a telephone, waiting for news to arrive from France, the same way he would wait for news from almost every big race for the rest of his life. That day, in 1949, and again in the years of wins that followed, including more wins at that same hard race through the 1950s and 1960s, Enzo Ferrari built the machine that finally crossed the finish line he had first watched, wide-eyed, as a 10-year-old boy in 1908. Other men's hands were on the wheel, every single time. His own hands never were, not once, not in almost 70 years spent chasing that same road. And so, my friend, this story comes gently to its close. Enzo Ferrari died on August 14, 1988, at 90 years old, in the town where his company had grown from a handful of workers into a name known on every continent. His family kept the news private for 2 more days, quietly planning his funeral away from cameras, before telling the world. It was one final piece of a life built, in so many ways, on knowing exactly what to show and what to keep hidden. When the news finally came out, kind words poured in from across the racing world, from rivals as much as from fans, many of them saying, for the first time in public, how deeply his hard will and his silence had shaped an entire sport. Only after his death was his younger son, Piero, finally named in public, welcomed at last into the company that carried his family's name, given his rightful place at the table his father had once kept so carefully closed. Piero would go on to help lead the company for years afterward, carrying forward both names his father had spent a whole life holding apart, the public one and the private one, joined together at last, in the light of day. Here is the strange shape of this man's whole life. The world remembers Enzo Ferrari by everything that could be counted: race wins, big titles, factory numbers, the huge amounts his small red cars now sell for at special auctions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars, for one single car he once sold new for so much less. Speed is loud, trophies get counted, newspapers print big numbers, and history books repeat them again and again, year after year, as if a scoreboard were the only honest way to measure a whole life, the only true story worth telling about a man. But under all of that noise, Enzo Ferrari spent years quietly protecting something no scoreboard could ever show: a hidden son he loved, without ever once saying so out loud; a private grief for another son he lost too young; a silence he carried, not because he felt nothing, but because some things, it seems, were never meant to be counted at all. He built one of the loudest, fastest, most photographed names in the whole world. At the very same time, he spent years quietly mastering the art of saying nothing about the parts of his life that mattered to him the most. Maybe that is the true gift he left behind. Not only the machines that carry his name to every corner of the world, but a quiet reminder that the most important things we build are not always the ones that end up on a scoreboard, or a trophy shelf, or a newspaper page. Some of the truest parts of a life are simply lived, carefully, quietly, and never fully counted by anyone at all. A race record can be broken next season. A quiet act of love for someone you care about rarely makes it into any record book at all, and yet it might be the part of a life that lasts the longest. So let me ask you something before we go. Have you ever built or protected something in your own life that almost nobody around you ever fully saw? And here is one more question for you. Do you think Ferrari would still be the great name it is today if that deal with Ford had really happened back in 1963? I would love to know what you think. Tell me in the comments below. Until tomorrow, my friend, take care of yourself and never stop learning.